Okay, hi guys and welcome back to the channel. I'm joined by David. Thank you for having me.
Morning, thank you for coming.
At the Vintage Watch Company in Burlington Arcade, London. So am I right in saying that this is the biggest vintage Rolex stock in the world?
Correct, it's the largest collection on display anywhere.
I mean, I've seen this store the first time in September when I moved to London, and it was just amazing to see so many mint condition vintage Rolexes in one place. I've never seen that anywhere before. What got you into vintage watches and vintage Rolexes more specifically?
So last year we celebrated 25 years
25
in business
years.
as a family business, my father and myself, and we started the store basically in a very small way, focusing on a multitude of different brands at the time. And basically what happened was the Rolexes were always outselling the other brands, be they Omega, Longines or any other brand itself. So the focus was always on Rolex. So my father had this concept that how would it work if we could concentrate on one brand as a vintage store and try and amass the largest collection we could find of that one dedicated brand and create a niche, as you say. So that was the context how we started, yeah. And the strength of the store is that it is one collection in one place, thousands of pieces on display, showcasing what is probably the most famous watch brand in the world.
Definitely, yeah.
And it's not necessarily the best or the most exclusive, but it has the most worldwide popularity.
Yes,
so you can come here, admire the window, and see basically Rolex from the very beginning, from its formation in 1905, the first officers' watches, the early pieces, the historic oysters, the first waterproof wristwatch made in 1926, and we kind of keep all of that in the collection, and then we go through to the most popular, desirable pieces.
It's almost like a museum, like...
Yeah, obviously we want to sell things, and people will come here as a destination, and certainly. So,
apart from the most important things that you have to look for as the condition of the material and the movement, what else do you look for in the value of a vintage Rolex? What makes the value of these pieces? Because these are obviously very special.
They're all very special, and ultimately people will come in and say, what's the rarest watch in the shop, show it to me, and to me that's like the worst possible question you can ask me, because it's all based on style and individuality and everything that you like, your identity, and what are you looking for in a watch. It's not really my opinion.
Yes.
We're here to showcase pieces that are wearable, desirable and rare at the same time, but they have to have some stylistic element to them, some fashion element to them. The reason I change the watch straps constantly and make the watches wearable is that we want you to wear them. We don't want people coming here just picking out very rare things and sticking them in a safe and never enjoying them and never ever getting seen by anybody else. For us, that's a pointless thing. We are fashion-led, design-led, and the byproduct of the pieces are that they are exclusive and rare, but they're here to be enjoyed for sure. That's the most important element. Okay, so what is GMT Master? It's now probably the most popular sub-brand of Rolex, out there at the moment. History: Rolex first made the GMT Master for Pan Am Airways, International Airways, in 1955 as the first version. It wasn't a production watch at the time. They asked Rolex to create a watch that could be used by their pilots on transatlantic travel to read 2 time zones at once. The popularity was so great that Rolex did put it into production very soon afterwards. Its characters were a distinct 2-tone design on the bezel, and the very first pieces were made out of a Bakelite plastic acrylic material. They had no protection around the crown guard in that period. Pieces now are extremely rare because those bezels were very fragile.
What I love on these, as opposed to the later on the steel bezels or the aluminum bezels, is that it just adds to that vintage look.
Sure.
And the way they age is just fantastic.
Yeah, and that's another important criteria. So these are very similar pieces, but the aging is completely different.
Yes.
And this is on the right hand side what we call a tropical dial, which means that the dial has completely faded and changed color from its original format of black to an intense brown, and that process has happened through exposure to temperature and sunlight, and it's literally faded out the colour, and you get these incredible brown tones across the face.
Fantastic.
And they are extremely desirable and obviously very, very rare, so they kind of affect the price dramatically. So you could be looking at this being 3 or 4 times more expensive than its
Oh wow. That's
basic
incredible.
format.
And on that note, that's something I actually wondered about. With the patina, that's what you refer to it, right? The
Yeah.
aging process. Do you think that the way, because of the fact that today Rolexes, or the modern day Rolexes, are better built, that it will take a longer time, or it will be more difficult for them to age in such a beautiful way than these pieces?
Yeah, it's
making
almost
these even more valuable in that sense.
correct. And if anything, Rolex see this whole area as a fault in their design, and they have spent many years engineering out this process.
Yes.
So when you have things like ceramic bezels, they are designed to set color and never change, basically. So are you going to get this on modern watches? No.
So what about the one you're wearing?
So this is also a GMT,
too?
but this is extremely rare because it's known as the blueberry. So it has an all blue bezel, was originally made for the Middle Eastern military market.
Okay.
It wasn't available in-store watch. It was supplied to the military. So they are very, very, very rare. And
What's your favorite modern day GMT then? Which color combination do you?
I do quite like the Batman, the introduction
Batman.
of the blue, because again that harks back to an earlier period. So
Yes.
it is an acknowledgement and endorsement by Rolex that the blue kind of model existed. I think that's a nice color combination. And when they introduced the Jubilee bracelet, I think that was quite cool.
Yeah,
So,
it's beautiful.
everything that Rolex does in modern watches affects the old, and it's actually very complementary to the vintage collection. And often when a new model is released, you will find a huge upsurge in demand for the equivalent version in vintage. So it's always important to know what's coming out. A lot of the pieces sold via this store are sold by birth year. They're either gifted to a person from the year of their birth, or you select something as your first watch that has that extra meaning. And you told me your birth year is 98, so if you were to reach over and see, you'll see a GMT from 98 for yourself. And that's actually the different variant of an all black bezel. So it has a lot of characteristics at first glance of a Submariner, but actually it's a GMT, so the bezel still rotates and it does read the alternative time zone, but the bezel is entirely black.
So what do we have here now?
Well, moving through the collection, if you're going to come to the store, you're not really going to walk away without having seen any Daytonas or chronograph pieces, so I wanted to just quickly go through a history lesson on those. Rolex's the most complicated wristwatch was known as the moon phase, which displayed both the day, the month, the date and the phases of the moon. It's a very, very oversized case, and it's automatic, and they were made in gold, yellow gold, rose gold and steel, and they're extremely rare pieces. And this is quite nice to be able to see one up. It's not something I would always have in store, so that kind of sets the scene from the early 50s into the chronograph Daytona pieces.
It's very classy.
That's made 1952. Then you move into the 3 register chronographs, which are my favorite. I'm not a big lover of 2 register watches. I think they're much more pretty with 3 registers. And then the first Daytona itself is made in 1963, so there's a crossover between what we call pre-Daytona models, where the color of face is all one tone and the bezels are still smooth in that period. There's no tachymeter scale on the outside of the watch. It's all held within, and the registers and dial are the same color. That's known as the 6238 model, the pre-Daytona. Very light. You move along and the registers from this point are always a reverse color, so silver with black in the register, or black dials with cream registers themselves. And you blend through into the 70s. By the late 60s, you get the introduction of the screw-down waterproof locking mechanism for the actual pushers themselves. And then the bezel has an element of either steel or black on the surround, making the watch look considerably larger.
Yes.
This area has the piece known as the big red Daytona. So it has red in the arc of the bottom subsidiary, quite large in red text. Gold pieces also made, and then one of the most iconic is the silver.
These are beautiful.
Then on top of all these pieces, which are extremely rare in their own right, there are the variant of dials known as now Paul Newman, made famous by him who wore them. But from Rolex's perspective in the catalogue, they would call that an exotic dial, so it had a different colour combination.
Okay.
Again, if you're here, might as well show you. So,
yeah.
Not something I keep in the window, but the Paul Newman collection itself are now hundreds of thousands of pounds. So the whole market's changed immensely.
Wow.
But black dials,
I've never seen one in person. It's
cream dials.
what gives away that it is Paul Newman? What's the first thing?
The character of the dial, the text and font and everything is totally different. It's called an exotic dial.
Okay.
So they have the outer tracking on the edge, and it's quite a completely extreme difference. Much more matte in its features.
Oh, and I see the subdials kind of have these boxes.
Yeah, the square
instead of
plotted.
the square, exactly. Beautiful.
And depending on the different model itself, outer minute track in red is quite special.
Yes, when I think of Paul Newman, this is the one I have in mind with the red outer.
Yeah, that kind of historically puts vintage, on the worldwide map. The sale of his own watch of over $17 million at auction.
Yes.
Back in around 2019, I think it was, or 17, I can't remember exactly, but it changed everything and really catapulted vintage pieces onto the front page of every newspaper worldwide. So, everybody from that point understood, knew of vintage Rolex as a brand in itself.
Okay. These are probably my favorites.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty obvious to anyone that's seen my book, read my book, they'll know that my personal passion lies within the day-date, within the stellar stone dials, and the colour and diversity of those pieces for me is extraordinary. And every day it's kind of personal passion when I find something new that I've never seen before, colours that have never come up before, or just pieces that I haven't seen for years. And this market now has absolutely exploded. It used to be quite a niche area where certain collectors from the Middle East or certain people were into these watches and everyone else thought they were hideous. But now everybody's in love with the Stellar dial. I'm constantly sent emails on a daily basis from all over the world, regions that you wouldn't imagine, women, men, everybody is after the same tones of colours, and they're becoming extremely rare and hard to find now. His gives you a few colours in front of you now, but beautiful red early stellar pieces. They're just stunning, and no one colour is actually the same because the way that the dials were made were a mix of paints, and they were fired enamel finish, and each batch would be a different colour, so you could have 5 greens in front of you and no one colour would actually be the same, and that's again makes the whole thing that much more interesting. Some had diamonds on the dials, diamonds on the bezels, very elaborate dial combinations, and stone dials were introduced too, so you have onyx, lapis, tiger's eye, coral, bloodstone, extremely rare pieces, which again now are constantly sought after.
You don't get that variety of material on the dials anymore.
Well, they're extremely fragile, and to be honest, modern production, people don't want to work in these in these types of materials because they're just too difficult to work in. So there's so much hand work on the early pieces. The setting of the diamonds, the quality is incredible. The craftsmanship, pretty unique. It's not something you see anymore, to be honest. sometimes you look at something and think, I can't believe that would have ever been produced. But
This is incredible. This
amazing,
is
like a losange diamond shape pattern on the face itself, made out of diamonds, rubies, sapphires. Incredible pieces. I kind of look at them myself and are constantly amazed, and the colours, the intensity of the orange on
It's
on
difficult
that
not
piece.
to be amazed. I mean,
Yeah.
the brightness, and it's kind of brings this fun side to
Yeah.
Rolex that you wouldn't necessarily think of when
Correct.
you think of Rolex.
Correct.
It's so special.
I based the front cover of my book on a yellow stellar dial, which is basically the rarest colour, and that then coincided at the back end of 2020 with Rolex introducing this Oyster Perpetual range of highly elaborate colours, including yellow and Tiffany blue, and that was kind of a nod again from Rolex to their past and the acceptance that these dials
Yes.
were there, and an acknowledgement that they existed. So that was again hugely influential on the market. So a yellow is something I will always keep really in my collection, because
Beautiful.
yellow stellar is the epitome of these pieces.
Okay, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for having me today. It was really a pleasure. And if you want to know more about the watches that are in stock, then just check out the Instagram and the link to the shop. I'll leave everything down in the bio, and see you next time. Ciao.
Thank you.